This is the Amp Hour Podcast, recorded April 14th, 2014. Episode 194, with guest Todd Bailey, Embedded Embrasure Engineering.
Welcome to the Amp Hour. I'm Dave Jones from the EEV blog.
And I'm Chris Gamble of Contextual Electronics.
And I'm Todd Bailey. I'm an embedded systems contractor in Brooklyn, New York.
Hey, Todd.
Hey, Todd.
Welcome to the show.
Hey, guys. Good to be here.
Forgot the most important, an Ohio, Cleveland-ish native, I believe.
I can't claim Bone Thugs as much as I'd like to.
Well, that's okay.
But he doesn't live there anymore, so it can't be that great.
Oh, no. No one ever says
this is a problem. This is a problem with Cleveland people in general. It's the good ones tend to go. No offense.
Smart
No, it's okay, man. It's okay. It's okay.
Oh dear.
So it was good talking to you. Well, it's been real. Yeah. All right. Well,
I'll see you around Thanksgiving.
Yeah, that's right. We'll have a beer. So I met you. Obviously, you're come back for holidays, and I think I actually started hearing about you from all of your interest in Jim Williams stuff and analog stuff. So you're the weird mix of like analog and embedded. What the hell's going on with that?
Well, all right.
It's called normal electronics, Chris.
I would say to a proper zealot, right? There's a continuum, right? Like at the one end, there's a diode with a P and an N, right? And then at the other end, there's C, which is talking to a lot of P's and N's, but it's all electronics.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. So you take a holistic view of the industry and all the way up till you start writing high level code, and then you start running away like me.
Yeah, I mean, I've even had to do that too. It's not my favorite thing. I think it was Jim Williams, maybe, or somebody who said my favorite programming language is still solder. It's from the Jim Williams book. It might not be Jim, but I prefer to work in hardware. But anymore, it's a rare day where a circuit is all analog.
That's true. Yes, I agree with that. So how did you get here? Because that's another thing that I'm interested in with you is your background, getting to the point you are now. So what's your background?
So I'm a contractor now, and I started out. I think I know the story that you want me to tell, and I started out. My degree is in English literature. It's from Oberlin, which is a college in Ohio, which is a hootsy-tootsy college that mostly teaches kids how to have funny haircuts.
It's true, folks. It's true.
No offense, Oberlin alumni.
They're not listening. Which is why it's so interesting, though, right? Honestly, like I heard that the first time I met Todd, I'm like, oh, wow, that's just an interesting point.
Yeah, so I started out going there, and my degree is mostly in postmodern literature and what have you, and it was a great degree, and I was happy to get it. But during that time, my dad was an electrical engineer, and I grew up. I had one of those 20-in-1 electronics kits, and
Yay.
I knew how to use them. Yay! And I knew how to use a multimeter from science fair projects and stuff like that. And in college, I worked doing sound. It was a time when I still thought that was cool. But the good news about that is it got me repairing amplifiers and using an oscilloscope. And towards the end of my college career, I took one class, and I weaseled my way into a class in digital and analog circuit design that had Horowitz and Hill as the textbook. Which was, I'm sure that everyone who's listening to this knows of Horowitz and Hill, but if you don't, yeah. Well, it's the book. So I think that had a lot to do with it. I had two really great professors in that class, and my first, I got my hoity-toity degree in English, and my first job out of school was in a stereo repair shop.
And because there's no jobs in literature.
Well, that was a screw up too. I mean, I got out of school and I what I really wanted to do was be in a rock band, right? So,
right.
So I spent a lot of time, writing on a typewriter about rock music, like a doofus, and
like in Almost Famous, like
Almost Famous, yeah,
James Cameron, yeah.
Right.
Name a bad rock movie, and I've probably seen it.
Detroit Rock City,
almost seen it.
Yeah.
Both Detroit Rock City and Almost Famous made it into my thesis.
Nice.
Anyway, so I spent a lot of time screwing around, and I worked repairing stereos because I wanted lots of time to, waste playing scales in my basement. And during that time, at the stereo repair shop, you spend a lot of time. This one of the reasons I think I liked those Williams books so much is there's an essay called "The Importance of Fixing," right? And I read that essay and I was like, this man has the right idea, because it. Like sitting around with your hands inside a broken thing and getting shocked and getting cut and wasting a bunch of time and looking at similar circuit topologies over and over and over again is a great and humbling experience. And it gives you a lot of confidence after a while. So, you would be like, well, I've seen a bunch of diff amps at this point. I could probably build a diff amp, and you can't at first, right? You screw it up a million times, but it gives you the confidence to try. So during that time, I built the first handful of, crappy circuits that I built outside of a classroom, and they were all musical circuits. And, they were op amps and 555 timers and the stuff that everybody starts with in analog. And I was probably 22 at that point. Mm-hmm. As time went by, I kept doing that sort of thing, and I kept working at, dumb young person jobs, and
such as
after the stereo repair shop, I worked in a bar.
All right, yeah. Is there a record store in there? Maybe.
I worked in a club. I worked at the Empty Bottle in Chicago.
Nice. Okay.
Again, cultivating my cool points, not exactly cultivating my engineering career much. This is the stuff that doesn't make it into my LinkedIn profile.
Right. Well, I was going to say though too, like Todd is successfully already bridged the gap between engineering at this point, or even just technical stuff at this point, to being able to meet people of the opposite sex. That's pretty good. That's pretty good to start with. So,
don't. It's no comment.
Right.
So anyway, during this time, I got into building bigger and bigger and goofier circuits. Most of them were audio related, and at some point,
the girls went away.
Yeah.
At some point, the girls didn't show up anymore.
They were never a whole lot there to begin with. So it was a small distance to travel.
Right. Okay.
So I built these synthesizers, and at some point, when you build a synthesizer or an audio device and you want to have a bunch of functions in it, you usually end up building a sequencer or a set of switches or something like that. And I was like, God, it is so annoying to have to make these big boards of 4000 series CMOS logic. There must be a better way to do logic in a smaller package. And I was like, I could learn to program. And it seems blasphemous, but I bet it would be handy. And the funny thing is, I got at that point, it was probably 2001 or 2 maybe. And I got a PIC microcontroller and learned assembly for it. I programmed a little bit for the Commodore 64 a long time before that, but it was the first, honest to goodness programming that I had done, or that I was actually remotely interested in. And the funny thing is, no one really cared that I could, at that point I knew, I could make, I made a really simple RFID circuit at that point. Nobody really cared about that, but people did care all of a sudden once I could program in assembly. And so I would get asked to do odd jobs for people and build weird stuff for people. And I ended up meeting a guy at a bar who was an engineer at a toy company. And I remember there were no Arduinos at this point, and I think it was some listserv that a friend of mine sent me a link to, and it was for artists who use microcontrollers in their art. And I was real curious about this, and so I went to it, and I met this engineer. His name's Dima. He's a professor now. And he was bringing in a USB oscilloscope, and he was going to show everyone his USB oscilloscope, and I had built some stupid microcontroller circuit that, I think it took serial input and changed light colors or something. It was not very impressive, but I brought it in, and he brought in his oscilloscope, and I started talking shit about his oscilloscope because I was like, look how terrible the display on that thing. How does anyone debug a circuit with this? And of course he's really cocky, and he's like, who are you? You work in a bar. And I was like, well, it's true. I do work in a bar, but that trace looks terrible.
Making friends already, huh, Todd?
Anyway, so we got into it about oscilloscopes, and he was like, what, do you have a scope? And I said, well, yeah, I have this Tech 454 is the scope that I have, but it was just broke for a little while, and I just got it running again. And he said, wait, you can fix an oscilloscope? And I said, well, yeah, you're an engineer, can't you fix an oscilloscope? And the interesting thing was I had no concept of what it was really that engineers did and what the difference. I just assumed that whatever it was that I was working on with a voltmeter and oscilloscope and Horowitz and Hill was somehow fundamentally different than what engineers did. And I was like, whatever they're doing, they're working on cell phones, they know what S parameters are. I don't know. They know something that I don't know. And what you started to learn is that's true sometimes. They did. There were a lot of things they didn't know, but there were things that they were just doing the same stuff I was, right? They were like reading data sheets and scratching their heads. Anyway, this guy and I got to be good friends, and he was like, if you are tired of working at a bar, perhaps you should interview with this toy company. And I was really curious. I was like, I could get paid to do electronics. And so I did, and they pretty much hired me on the spot. And, thus began a bunch of 80-hour work weeks for many years of my life designing toys. And the first month was really awkward because I was like, I can't screw up my bar job. What if this engineering thing doesn't work out?
Engineering's not that stable, guys. Come on.
It was true. I was like a Russian kid with a turnip. I was like, I can't. What if I don't think they're going to figure out at some point that I actually that I don't know something, and this is going to last. And I'm still doing it today, and I don't work at a bar anymore. So so far, young Todd Bailey was wrong.
So just like imposter syndrome, that kind of whole thing. I mean, pretty common in a lot of engineering, right?
Is it?
Oh yeah, we were talking.
Yeah.
We were talking about last week.
Fake it till you make it, right?
Well,
Is that the motto? Fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
I was hoping engineering was a place where that didn't happen.
No, wait. No, it's all just, okay, so some people know exactly what they're doing, but I think a lot of times, it's like, oh, I can figure this out, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole engineering mindset to me is that
you have the tools
different.
To figure it out. We're always on this show saying that you do your 4 years of engineering degree and you come out knowing nothing, but but in theory, you should have enough tools to go out and learn. What you should have at that point is your pride, right? Like you should have the idea that you can do a thing. And that'll bite you tons of times, but it'll help you too.
Right. During the learning process, of course, right? That's what it really is the learning process. I'm interested by this tie-in to the toy industry too, because obviously Jerry, who I think you know as well, I'm always interested. I thought there was someone else too, but I mentioned it the other week. This tie-in with the toy industry. It's very interesting to me, and it's such a crazy business. Obviously, I've heard you talk about it a lot. I've heard Jerry talk about it a lot, but it seems like it's just the gauntlet for learning and quick turn, elegant solution type of stuff. Oh, it was Alicia. She was talking about it. That's who it was. She was on the show.
There are a lot of great things about toy design. There are some less great things about toy design, too. One thing about it that's really, really good are a number of iterations, right? You build, the company that I worked for is called Big Monster Toys. They're still around. They still rule. I still do jobs for them. And the longer I am away from that job, the more I realize that they were a great shop and a first experience in proper engineering that I couldn't have gotten luckier. But that was in Chicago, and that place probably made, I want to say, like 200 toy prototypes a year.
Holy crap.
Wow. Yep.
Yeah. And, not all of those were electronics. There were a lot of plush toys and stuff that came out of there that I'd never had hands on, but I touched a lot of those things. And of those 200, I think the business model for a place like that, BMT was an invention house. And so the idea is you're bros with Hasbro and Mattel and a handful of smaller toy companies, and they come in and you pitch them ideas. Like, what they're into historically, and what their lines are. And so Mattel comes in and you try and sell them the next Barbie, right? And they'll either bite on it or they won't. And if they do, they take it away. Most of the time they send it back, but sometimes they take it away and they keep it.
Yeah.
As in the physical prototype you're talking about.
Well, there's lots of ways to sell a toy, and I think my old bosses would have been like, well, the best way, right, is to make a crayon drawing and have a great concept and sell this thing, which is in the ether, and still get paid for it.
Because it doesn't take much effort to do a crayon drawing, right? Yeah.
Exactly. In real life, that rarely happened. So one of the great things about BMT is they weren't afraid to really make a prototype. Your sales go up a whole lot when you show someone the thing that they're buying. And in fact, the great thing about that shop was there were machinists there were model makers, there were sculptors who were really, really good. We could build pretty much anything, and it was mostly old handy guys. There wasn't a whole lot of computer-aided machining. There was a little bit, but not much. And then there were a couple nerds whose job it was to code whatever it was and build whatever circuits that were going to go into this thing. And we could, regularly, if we couldn't make a thing that was better than production, we were not doing our job right. So the good thing about it was that you did this all the time. And of those 200, you maybe sold 10 in a year, and of those 10, maybe, maybe like 2 or 3 or 4 made money, but they made a lot of money. So it was this model where you really had to crank through stuff. Mm-hmm. And that was good because, I remember the first circuit that I worked on there. It was for a toy that never got sold. And I think they probably gave it to me because it was, they knew I didn't know what I was doing yet.
It was doomed.
And it was, yeah. It was called Beast in a Bag. And, and Beast in a Bag, I built this, I still was real soft on programming. So, Beast in a Bag, the idea was they were like, it's got this really loud motor in it and it has to listen to the player talking to it. When the player makes sounds, it has to respond. But I was like, it's got this microphone right next to this motor. Whenever the motor kicks on, you pick up a bunch of you pick up a bunch of noise on your microphone, and the toy can't handle that very well. So, I went to all this trouble to try and sample audio in different points and figure out what the best way to solve this problem. And it did a terrible job, and it didn't really work. And after a while, there was a contractor there who's now a great friend of mine who taught me a ton of stuff. His name is also Todd. And they were like, Todd Bailey, if you ever have trouble, you can call Big Brain Todd and ask him for advice. And I was like, I'll be damned if I call Big Brain Todd and ask him for advice. I'm going to figure this out. And eventually, after beating my head against this, I did. And he was like, and this guy has forgotten more about programming than I will ever know. And it was like, oh, yeah, that problem is really, really hard to solve, and they're never going to solve it in production. And so what I do is just run the motor and don't listen while you run the motor. I was like, that's what you do? You just cheese out like that? And he was like, yeah, it's the best solution. It only takes half a second, and and the thing works right. So you learn those lessons like that I still would probably be working on that circuit. The good news is you have to throw that away, right? I threw away that turd and moved on to the next circuit with a lesson learned. And that is one of the things that's really beneficial. Being able to touch many different kinds of things and being able to go through lots of iterations. Those are beneficial things. And always making a thing that the goal is to have it physically produced. There's an idea that you can't you really don't prototype very much if you know that it's unbuildable. Occasionally we made a Rock'em Sock'em Robots that shocked people. And we did that. And we did it for fun. We were like, yeah, that's never getting sold. But,
kids love it when they're conscious.
They do love it.
What would happen if you had you thought it was a spectacular idea, but you had no idea how to produce it, or if it was producible? Would you still pitch it because it was just such an awesome idea?
Maybe. It usually wouldn't get that far because the people at the toy shop knew what was producible and what wasn't. So someone would come up with an idea, and if it took a lot of work to bring into the prototyping world, it usually wouldn't make it that far.
Got it.
Occasionally there were toys. I mean, it's like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Indiana Jones brings the Ark back, and they're like, "You got this Ark. What are you going to do with it?" And they put it in the warehouse of all the other Arks of the Covenant. The back room at that place is like that. Like, you walk back there, and there are, it's the land of forgotten amazing toys. Because it's not always the good ones that sell.
Of course, yeah.
So yeah.
So
you get pretty zen.
It's the farty gnome that sells, right?
It's the branded that sells. So the new creative toy, which is out on its own, is often less likely to sell than the Dora the Explorer branded birthday cake or what have you.
Yep.
Which is one of the reasons. Yeah. Well, there's more signs of the times in the toy industry, but I've gibbered about that too long. Anyway, toys are great. There are things about them. You're never going to get to make a wildly precise circuit in toys, and you're not going to use a processor that does a whole lot in toys. And that's one of the reasons why ultimately when I left, I was like, I would like to spread my wings. And, there are great, great engineering challenges in the toy world, and I still find lots of them very hard. But, there were things that I realized I was never, ever going to get to work on if I stayed there, and I was curious to see what they were like.
Huh. So, what was next?
Well, shortly after that, so I worked there for, I think, 3-4 years, and was the chief engineer there when I left. And I became a contractor, and at the time, I didn't know what that would mean. I had this plan, right? And the plan was, I was like, man, one day, this is rocker dude Todd talking. One day, wouldn't it be great to make a living somehow with electronics, to pay the bills, touching a soldering iron or something? And that job provided that. And it was really cool. And I was like, oh man, all right, well, what's next? What's next is maybe would it be possible for me to not only, keep my fridge full of domestic beer and organic peanut butter, would it also be possible for me to be my own boss and do that? And so the next step was to try and do that. And so I left, and I had a handful of clients. Most of them were at that point were toy clients, and a couple artist clients that I built stuff for. And my overhead was really low at that point, so I could have a not so great year. And still it was fine. And so, for the first year, I guess, I lived in Chicago, and I built, people's art projects. I would try and design little circuits and sell them, to bridge the gaps. As time went by, I got more and more clients, and work started getting better and better. And I moved to New York. And as time went by, pretty much exclusively through word of mouth and a little bit through schmoozing, you meet. It's, one thing about being a freelance embedded systems engineer is there aren't very many of us, and that's a good thing as far as finding work goes. And a thing that's not so good is there are really not that many people who need what you do.
Right.
I think it's increasing though. Honestly, I mean, these days at least. I don't know if you see that.
I could talk about that at length, but
okay, we'll get there.
Anyway, so the path was pay rent with electronics, pay rent being your own boss with electronics. And then I was like, I think the next thing is to try and design and sell my own products, which I had a brief stint with and sometimes still flirt with. But I realized that I'm not that great at that. Like, I'm not a wonderful salesperson. I like building stuff. And I get real fired up about that. And once it gets to like move in units, I find that I'm a whole lot less effective. So once that sort of went away, I was like, well, for now, until I find a different goal, I just, this is going to sound real after school special, but I want to be the most badass engineer that I can be.
You can do it. Is that the response?
Yeah. Right.
I was hoping you could do better, but I'll take it.
I was going to say, like, the theme music would kick up at that point, and, like, montage kicks in. Okay.
You're like, believe it or not, I'm walking on air.
So what did that involve? I mean, was that like just like self-education, that kind of stuff, and like learning more by taking harder jobs, that kind of idea?
Yeah, well, so what you were saying before about fake it until you make it, what I hope you were saying was you can take someone will ask you if you can do a thing, right? Someone will say, I need you to build something which moves and lights up and also talks to God.
You can be
and you'll be
yes
like,
man.
Okay.
Yes,
and you're
yes.
like, okay, well, I can definitely make something that moves and lights up, and I've never made something talk to God before, but I can take a shot at it. And if your client is like, well, we can't find anyone else who's going to do a better job of making it talk to God. Why don't you take a shot at it? Then that's the best possible situation you could be in, because everyone's on the same page. You're not promising something you can't deliver, and the chances
they
are
still expect it though.
They expect it if you tell them you can do it. If you're square with the client. Like, my policy has always been to tell a client it's going to cost more than it does, and then deliver under, and tell them it's going to be rough if you think it's going to be rough. And if they still, it's like if you set them free and they come back, then they're a good client,
and they
right?
love you.
And chances are it means that they've. And then if you do it, they're super excited. And that's a huge danger.
Well, these are usually customers that you've worked with before too, right? You wouldn't do this for an initial one, right?
Oh, I definitely would.
Oh, you would? Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, it's important. The more clients you get, the busier you get, the more leeway you get to screen your clients. So at some point, your spider sense kicks in a little when clients call you and they want an unrealistic thing, and you maybe explain to them in the gentlest possible way that what they're trying for is very, very difficult.
You're a friggin'
idiot. Well, sometimes they are. Sometimes they're just dumb, and sometimes it's just that they are inexperienced. Right. And the way that you go back and forth in that sort of conversation determines a whole lot how. Like you're like, I think I maybe can appreciate how this relationship is going to go. So giving a client a healthy dose of honesty is never really a bad thing, because the worst thing that happens is you lose a job you didn't really want anyway.
Here, let me punch you in the face with my honesty fist. Smack. Oh, goodness.
So, did that device talk to God, or what happened?
It never did.
No, okay. Suppose you wouldn't be on the show if it did, right? You'd probably be elsewhere.
No, I mean, I still just get a check at the end of it, and they go on and patent talking to God.
Yeah,
so.
right,
right. Okay.
So so some of these devices. So you said you actually cranked out some of your own devices as well that you didn't like. What were some of those?
I think the first thing that the very first thing that I tried to sell was it was a synthesizer kit that was a single tiny printed circuit board that I sold on tour with my rock band. And let me tell you, I cannot think of a worse business model than that, really. Where you're like, I'm drunk, you're drunk, here's a bag of parts. I think maybe one or two of those ever got made. I think I maybe sold 20. I think, I marked up. I maybe marked them up by like $2. I was like, I'm gonna make $2 on each one of these kits. It was terrible.
So you say you're not good at business? Is that what you said before?
Well, that was like, I was thinking of it as tour merchandise at that point, right? Not as, I was like, we could sell this 7-inch record, or we could sell this synthesizer, and I can make $2 whole on this instead of $1 on a 7-inch record. So in my mind, I was bankrolling, right? So I think that's the first thing I sold. I designed this binary watch that I sold a handful of a long, long time ago. And then the first thing that I sold any number of, and by number I don't mean a lot. I mean hundreds of, was this open source digital sampler kit called "Where's the Party At?"
That's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of abortive attempts before "Where's the Party At?" Well, "Where's the Party At?" was this idea. I got asked to talk at this thing called the Bent Festival, which is a circuit bending festival. You guys know about that world?
I know the world, but I don't know the festival. It's like where people take toys or synths or something like that. They tweak parameters, usually like resistors. They put in pots, and then they make the things go wee wee wee. Right?
That's relatively accurate. Yeah.
Then people dance to it for some reason. I don't know why.
people dance to a lot of things.
They do. Yeah.
But I had a real soft spot for this community. Just because it was a bunch of people who didn't, who were under absolutely no obligation to be doing electronics and made, spent the small amount of money they had on these hopeless projects. And strangely, that resonated with me. And I was like, you guys are fearless and you like electronics, and those things put you ahead of a lot of engineers already.
Agree.
And if only you could learn a little bit about how circuits worked, you might be dangerous. So at the time, and maybe still, in that community, people really, really loved the Casio SK1. And the Casio SK1 is this toy sampling keyboard, which is like you sample your dog barking into it, and then you can pitch your dog barks up and down and play Happy Birthday with dog barks or broken glass or whatever. And people love this thing, and they would circuit bend it to make all kinds of strings of random noise, and people were way into it. And these things, unmodified, would go for hundreds of dollars on eBay. And I was like, guys, if you can do that, or it's not that hard to just make a thing that does that, and then you can program it to do whatever sort of string of glitchy garbage you want it to do, and you can still wipe your tongue on it or whatever if that's your thing. You can even optimize it for tongue wiping. Like I can bet you I can make a circuit which responds better to tongue than the Casio SK1. And born of this was "Where's the Party At?" Where I designed a digital sampler, and I gave a lecture about how digital samplers worked. And the idea originally was to try and get people excited about learning electronics, and I made maybe 5 kits. And what I found is people were sort of excited about learning electronics, but they really wanted to buy this thing.
Right.
They were like, oh, that's they thought of it more as a product. And I was like, well, all right, that's not what I was going for, but I'll, hey, why not?
Hey, buddy.
So I sold a couple hundred of those sloppily, and this got out there in the world. And I designed a second rev of "Where's the Party At?", which is still in boxes, still on my shelf. And there's 300 of them. I can look at them right now, and have not been as motivated probably as I should to sell them, because partially because I did it already, and partially because it's like once you start to, this is what I'm about to say, I suppose, is the beginning of the end for engineers, but partially because I've worked on harder things and I've made more money, and so there's no financial motivation for selling "Where's the Party At?" anymore, and the technical side of it isn't nearly as challenging as it was when I first did it.
Right.
So
it's the refining now, right? It's the It's the product stuff that's less important than, or less interesting than the R&D stuff.
It's the product stuff, and you could say it's about cost reduction too, and you can honestly say it's about getting a thing out there, which is still cool and is still pedagogical, and I still believe in, but it does not have the appeal that it once did.
Right. Different skill set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done that. I've actually discontinued kits / projects that I've been selling, even though they're still selling and they're popular. People are giving me money, but I'm just not interested in it anymore. So, just couldn't be bothered. No, sorry, I'm not going to make it anymore.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, where's the party at? I have a personal goal for that to come out this year sometime.
You heard it here first, folks. You can come.
Actually, people have been hearing it on the forum for about 3 years now. But
moving target.
But I really would like to get that out of my life. Anyway, that was my first sort of
What you should do is what
experience.
Dave did. He said he was going to do the microcurrent gold for about 2 years, and then he finally just did a Kickstarter, and
that prompted me to actually
put his ass into gear, right?
Gear and do it.
Yeah.
That's right.
A proper deadline is a great motivation.
Yeah. Of course, if you do a Kickstarter, you might have to make a bunch more than 300, so that's a whole other set of
Still
issues.
shipping the bastards. Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is, like, how snotty do I sound right now? Like, that's the other thing that's it's hard to sit with, right? Where you're like, how many years ago was it where I was like, I just want to make things in my house with my soldering iron, and now I'm like, I can't be asked for n number of thousands of dollars. Boring. Like, so it feels jerky to even sort of have this conversation, but it's the truth.
I think your solution is to sell it to someone else and have them do it. Honestly, that's.
But maybe. I don't know what the solution is there. I think the solution is to get it out of my life and then move on.
All I want to do is kill it. So I can make new things. Okay, so what about after that then? I mean, so that was another phase. Are you still not allowed to talk about this big door thing? I mean, I know I said big door thing, but...
I can't talk about it a ton. I mean, so one of the problems about doing freelance stuff is you can talk about the fun jobs you do, but the jobs that are the challenging ones usually are NDA'd. Yeah. So I can say I made a bunch of robot doors for a fancy house in the Hamptons, but I can't really talk about it a whole lot more than that. Yeah. But it's a hard job. It took a bunch of years. There's a bunch of single board computers. They have to live in a marine environment. They have
for a door that opens.
For it, and it also closes.
All right, features.
Okay, well that complicates it. Yeah,
there's 63 of these things. They weigh about a ton each. The glass in one of these cost $20,000. And they, I ended up designing this power line communication system, which goes all around this house and allows these doors to talk to each other. I ended up designing a protocol for communicating over this power line, building all the circuits for it, building all the boards that went in each of these doors, building the hardware which coordinates all these door systems. There's pneumatics in this. It was really hard and very stressful, and it took a lot of hours, but it's more representative of the sort of job that I would do now.
Yeah, right. I'm amazed that that's a job where I think about that's being hired by a small company or a group of people or whatever for that kind of stuff, and it's just like I never would have thought of that. I always think engineering, bigger projects. Obviously, I've always been part of like bigger companies and stuff like that until recently, and just thinking about but yeah, people do hire for that kind of stuff, and that's where a lot of the interesting problems lie. The more I hear about it.
Well, it's recently. The more sort of legit you get, the more engineering gets broken up. Like when I was young, I was like, engineering is this one unified thing. And as you get older, as you get more into it, you split it sort of finer and finer. So what I'm doing, I would call applications engineering, right? Which is where I'm not designing an IC, right? I think that's where a lot of really hard, really awesome work is. Yeah. I don't have the skill set to do that. And nobody, as far as I know, is hiring freelance ASIC designers, right? So
maybe.
Or maybe they are.
Depends on what kind of ASICs, I think, but.
Yeah, nobody has asked me to tape out an LM324. So, so there is a lot of interesting work that goes on, and again, much like the toy world, you get these things come across your desk, and you get asked to do jobs which are of varying lengths, right? Anywhere from a couple days. I just finished a job this weekend, which was a couple days long, which was a blast. To a couple years, like this door job, and they're very different, and they're all sort of applications-y based. So they have the good things about the toy job in that you're working on different stuff all the time. But the net is a lot wider, and you find yourself being different things to different people.
Right.
To some people, I'm a programmer, and to some people, I'm a hardware guy. And it's cool. It's cool to be able to do all those things.
Yeah. See, I always call that system design. I guess it's application, like, because you're saying like you target different
system
applications.
Engineering. Yeah.
Yeah. Because we're still piecing together single boards, like you said, and then designing our custom hardware as we need it. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting pieces in there for sure. Last time you and I talked, you said I mentioned to you last time we were having beers, and I said I was interested in your work with artists as well, and I think you cautioned me against that. Why was that?
Oh, no.
I'm not saying you said every artist is an a-hole or something like that. I'm just saying that that's just good advice you gave me. I just want to, have you share your experience about that.
Well, because our mate Mike Harrison, of course, he's
right.
He works with art. He's a freelance designer, and that's what he mostly does. I think is
those big
work with artists,
arrays.
those big art installations. Big lead arrays and all sorts of arty installations.
Right. Well, there's sort of the.
Maybe I should take a step back and say, not that you caution me against it, but just what is your experience with working with art type installations and stuff like that? Is it a different set of challenges, or is it similar to other type of consulting jobs you've had?
Yeah, ultimately it is. The one cool thing about art jobs is you have the most arbitrary requirements for them, right? Like the set of requirements you get don't necessarily make functional sense, but they're just as valid. Like somebody's like, I need this thing, which normally, like I can't stand having a ugly heat sink, or I like this thing which would normally run on a motor. I don't like the way the motor sounds, so it can use a fundamentally different kind of motor, right? Or something. Problems like that are real problems, right? If they become that in an art context. And so those, again, it's cool because it puts constraints on you. And it also, with some of the best clients I've had, in toy or art clients, they they'll try and get an idea across to you, right? I want it to be like blah. And you have a certain amount of leeway in solving a problem like blah. Where blah, in this case, is like an idea or a feeling or something, which is an engineering problem that you don't come across in capital P proper engineering a lot. So that's fun.
Is capital P proper like where you're wearing like a monocle and like drinking tea while getting project requirements?
I thought that was the one when I had a cape on when I was standing on the corner with my fists on my hips. No. So that's a good thing about art engineering. One, like the flight of fancy involved in art engineering is great. And it's one of the things that makes it fun. One of the problems with art engineering, and probably the biggest problem I have with it, is, take at one end of the spectrum, you're totally can't be asked about it engineer who's been at some job and doesn't, it's just like, working for the weekend and has this thing that they need built, and they talk to you and they want it done. The amount of personal investment they have in that project is small. With artists, most of the time it's one person or a small number of people, and they are deeply invested in the thing that they want you to build. That can be good, but they usually are also broke. And so there are times like there are huge exceptions to all of these rules, but generally speaking, it's really hard to be a hard ass, right? You're doing, like, I do this stuff for a living, and I do it for fun. But the two are not. It's a good idea. It's been my experience that it's a bad idea to mix those two things, right? Like you do projects for yourself and your friends for fun, and you do projects for clients for money.
You engineering whore, you.
I like to see myself more as like Ryu from Street Fighter, but the point is, you get in the situation where somebody is deeply cares about their project and they really want you to do it, and they really believe in you, and it's this sort of warm fuzzy feeling, and you have to be like, I'm sorry, like. You have to either put yourself in this situation where you do a bunch of work for free, potentially, or the other thing that gets tied up is one liberating thing about doing art, right? I remember back in the day learning that artists didn't always make their own art. Like, do you know who Nam June Paik is? Nam June Paik is an artist that made a bunch of media art back in the 60s and 70s, and he built a TV synthesizer, and I always thought this thing was the shit. And at one point, this Russian guy who hired me for this toy job, turns to me while we're slaving over some toy and is like, he didn't make that, right? His tech made that, right?
Oh, really?
And I was like, no fucking way. No way. No. And he's the artist. He made the art. That's what artists do. They make the art. And Dima was like, ha 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 ha, how much you have to know? And then that was my job. Like, for a bunch of years, that was my job, to make other people's art and sign their name to it. And what you realize is that tech probably didn't care. And I didn't ultimately, after a while, care either, right? Like, you realize that the games are different, right? Like, an artist is good at things that I'm not necessarily good at, and they're interested in things that I'm not necessarily interested in. In some ways, it's the best I get the great part of the job, which is somebody comes up with an arbitrary goal, you solve it, you get paid, you go to a fun party, and then
free beer, free wine,
and then like maybe you get your hand shooken and maybe you don't, and you move on with your life, right?
Yeah.
And this poor artist has to validate this thing in the big gray goofy world of history, which they are probably better equipped to do than you are. There certainly are like typically when someone will ask me about a piece of art, I will be like, I think it's cool, or I don't think it's cool, or it works very well, or it's built very poorly.
Right. That over there is gray, and that one's green.
So the extent of hyperbole, I guess, that I'm willing to do about art criticism is not, it's just different than it would be. So I like my part of the job, and I realize that I kind of don't care about the assignation that would come along with that sort of thing. So that's a good. I suppose that's if you have your head on that way, building art stuff can be a good time.
Yeah, focus on the design and the interesting, fun, buildy stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So some of this build stuff for your friends. I think we talked about it on the show whenever it came out, but this crazy ass game synth, the monitor driving. I don't even know what it is. I remember there's FPGAs and there's like spaceships. Yep. What is this thing?
Vec 9. So Vec 9 is this one of my buddies, the guy who got me the job that I'm working at, the contract that I'm working at right now, who's now one of my coworkers, is a friend of mine, and he dragged home an Asteroids G05 monitor. You guys know what an Asteroids cabinet looks like?
Yes.
I think so.
You don't. You're too young, Chris.
I think I am too young. Is it the one where it's actually like you sit both sides of the table? Is that the idea, or is that a different one? I
think they do make an Asteroids cabinet like that, but the salient point about the Asteroids cabinet is it was built at a time before monitor technology for arcade games was codified. So, in the real early 80s, arcade games made a lot of money, and you had a bunch of people trying to solve arcade game problems in lots of different ways. And you see this proliferation of different kinds of hardware out there, where you'll get odd controllers, like, you'll get the Akari Warriors controller that turns, or you'll get, all manner of spinning discs and strange black lights in cabinets and, and atypical controllers. And in this case, with Asteroids and a few other games that are out there, you got an atypical monitor. The Star Wars game was like this too, where you have a monitor which draws with vectors rather than rasters, like a typical CRT might. So the fundamental thing about this Asteroids cabinet is it has a different CRT, and it draws like an oscilloscope or a radar, and not so much like a television. And consequently, it looks crazy. There are tracers and trailers and these dots that'll burn your eyeballs, and it looks amazing. And the lines are it's this game with incredibly crusty graphics and incredibly straight lines, and it looks really weird, and it looks really cool. And anyway, one of my buddies brought home, dragged home one of these monitors and was like, I bet we could do something with this. And we got all geeked about it, and we're like, let's try and make a video game with it. And rapidly, blew up the amp board on this monitor a couple times. The repair shop experience came in handy. And ultimately, this game, it's sitting on my bench right next to me right now, but it has this ancient transformer from an original Asteroids game. It has this monitor, which has been repaired a bunch of times now. And the deal is, you don't, in a normal arcade cabinet, you could send some combination of RG and B to the guns on the display. With this device, you don't. You send XY to it, but it's not like a scope where you just send it with high impedance and you send it, whatever signal you want and scale it such that it's useful. It's relatively low impedance input, and it's real fast. And you need to be, if you want to draw these vectors, you have to generate vectors, which means that you have to take into account the inductance of these coil windings that are on these yokes that are on the side of this monitor, and you have to take into account the hardware design of the amplifier, and you have to drive this relatively low impedance, this power amp, which has not much in the way of preamp on it. And anything you do with that circuit has an artifact on it and the screen, which you can really see because of the way that this monitor is built. So our idea was, the guys at Atari, actually, one of the times I went out to Analog Aficionados, I met one of the guys who worked on the Atari team that worked on vector games, and went over to his house and brought him some cookies, and we talked about vector games. And those guys,
that's awesome.
Right? They were really, really smart, and they were really, really motivated, and they made some really great solutions. And we were like, it's umpteen years later, shouldn't we be able to do just a little bit better than that, given the state of the art today? And that was sort of the goal, was to be like, how hard can we push this piece of hardware to display crazy 3D stuff, which it never, the original designers never would have envisioned it doing. And to that end, my buddy Andrew designed this FPGA, which is basically a graphics card. Andrew Rattano is his name. Some of the details are on his website. His net name is Batsley Adams, but he designed this what essentially amounts to a graphics card, which you stream a bunch of commands and vector data into, and it hangs out clocking out information to a DAC in this configurable way to be able to tune this thing to this monitor. And then I designed this high-speed, relatively high-current DAC board, which hooks up to this FPGA, which drives the amplifiers on board this monitor. And then from there, then actually, so at that point, we could crudely draw, triangles and squares and stuff.
How much current are we talking about here? I mean, like, what is the current load roughly?
Of the monitor?
Yeah, like one of the signal lines that you're driving. What are these swings that you're driving with this DAC board?
I mean, they're not nuts. They're probably plus and minus 15 volts for the X and Y, I think. Mm-hmm. Maybe plus and minus 15 and plus minus 10 at 20 megahertz. And I think there may be one of the lines is, I think, 1K, and the other one is like 220 ohms or something like that. Okay. So, they're not, I mean, it's not driving a speaker at 20 megahertz. but it's enough that like if you get ring on that circuit, you will sure see it. So it has to be clean. It can't suck. Right. But it was fun to design that, right? And you have all these weird, strange requirements. Like it has to go really fast, but it's relatively, it's got these. It runs on 60 volts, right? So, like, good luck finding op amps that work that way.
They're coming, man. They're coming. New high voltage processes.
Voltages just keep getting higher as years go by. That's what I heard.
No, seriously, I think Maxim has a new process. Like, for real. I think they're moving up that direction.
So for, like, electric cars and stuff?
Yeah, like that. I mean, because they're moving into that market. I think what they're doing, they're just making the trenches bigger, but, you know what I mean? Like, right. For these big fets, but...
Anyway, so blah blah blah. So we build this thing, and then actually the funny thing is, like, we finally get it to display like a square on the screen, and we're like, damn, now we need to make a game out of it. So the whole thing, like, this hardware gets to work pretty well, and we're like, now we got to program this video game. So all of a sudden, it turns into this 3D programming problem. Where, if we were trying to write a video game for a PC or something, there's a ton of libraries you can use. I'd done just a hair of OpenGL stuff. But because this thing thinks about the world in terms of vectors, and because it's rendering to this bizarre piece of hardware, trying to shoehorn like a graphics library that you'd use for your actual monitor, trying to use your GPU for it is real kludgy. And so we were like, well, we'll just solve it by writing a 3D engine, which was not trivial. And it's like, like you start to, like, I had always been real soft on, dot product and cross product and vector math and that sort of thing. And it was this, because in real life, it's rare that I apply those.
Of course.
And you find that it's this. We wrote a simulator for it, so you can simulate the vector game on your PC, so you don't actually have to boot up this hot, dangerous monitor all the time. And
only 60 volts, man.
It's 60 volts, but it's got all these X-ray warnings on it, like the phosphorus kick off ton of radiation, I guess. So
hey guys, I'm firing up the test system. Put on your lead underwear.
Yeah, right. So. And it's like, there's like mad transformers all over your bench next to whatever you're working on for your job. Anyway, the problem got a lot bigger, and we got really ambitious about what we wanted it to do. And it got to the point where we have, like 3D models flying around a screen for, this is weird Vec9 engine for this thing. And when you when you waste a bad guy, like he flies apart into vectors and they, have particle effects and everything. And it looks badass. But again, originally, actually, the game is about cosmonauts awaking from being frozen in space and blowing up Chicago. So right now yeah, totally, it's about rescues. And it's got we put a secondary monitor in the thing. It has this green screen CRT monochrome from like an ATM that like hangs out in it that like shows a picture of your co-pilot Leica. And
there's video of it, and we'll post that in the show notes as we have in the past. It's fun to watch.
Anyway, I guess the whole point of this is also like, I guess this is like, what is this about? I don't really know. It's like there's this one hand clapping-y thing that's like there's these Where's the Party Ats that are this awesome project but not quite done, and then there's this vector game which is this awesome project but also not quite done. So I don't know if you guys can solve that one. I'd listen to that amp hour.
So the tagline is Todd Bailey. He'll finish projects if you pay him. Otherwise, they're just cool.
I wish I could take issue with that statement.
I know. Well, it's right though. I mean, like it's like when you're solving. You are in. It sounds to me like you're in it for the technical challenges. Once you get past those, it's like, well, what's the point after that? And that makes a lot of sense. You're doing it for you. So that's. I don't know. So I should say. I was going to say at the beginning of the show, Todd has been one of the most enthusiastic person I've ever met about hobby electronics. I mean, obviously I talk to Dave every week, right? So that's saying a lot. I mean, both of you two. I mean, both of you are like just so into it, right? I mean, and it seems like you're both always on too. So I think that's worth stating as well.
Well, thanks.
You're welcome. Keep it up.
I don't think of it as a hobby for what it's worth.
Right. Well, but I mean, like, so I consider like this stuff though. Like, so like Where's the Party At? And I guess maybe you didn't consider that at the time, but I mean, this game. You're never. I mean, are you ever gonna commercialize it? I think of that. Like, you're working on that kind of stuff on weekends and like doing FPGAs and vector math on weekends. I hate to tell you, man, if there's no profit motive at the end, that's a hobby, I think.
So the older I get, the more I consider what you're saying, and the more I'm like, is that really true, right? Like, the whole reason I have a job is because of this hobby, right? I think it's more like, when I think anymore, like, as I get older, I'm like, am I going to be a like weird shut-in, who like hangs out with transistors for the rest of my life? Maybe. What does that mean? Like, what are like working at a... So I have this contract where I work on fancy defense stuff now, which we've talked about off the air and can't talk about on it. And at that particular job, the people there are not weird. Like, they're not strange zealots. They don't listen to this podcast. They,
Dave.
I don't know.
You're missing out a whole segment there, whole market segment.
They're people who do their job and they go home.
Right. Yeah, I've worked with people like that as well.
Yeah, totally.
And the whole reason why I have an English degree and can be in there, like getting hired to do this stuff, is because of this bug, right? Like, that a handful of people have. I have this idea that I'm like, you know what a hobby is? A hobby is like cooking. Like, I like cooking. I'm not great at cooking. I'm never going to be a professional chef, but I can make a scrambled egg. And like, I'm like, normal people come home, and when they have a hobby, their hobby is not what they do for money. It's not like they just turn the meter off and keep making eggs, right? Like,
I do.
Like a line chef at Denny's, you mean? Like, coming home and like being like, I'm going to make another grand slam.
I'm gonna perfect my chopping my onion, because if he does that, he's probably not going to be a line cook at Denny's for that long, right? So like, the word hobby to me now means this thing that like normal, like relatively mentally healthy people do that doesn't have anything to do with their job. And for me, I'm like, I don't know. There's this differentiation that I have where like people in all stripes of life who work too much basically have this thing where they do it because they take either self-validation from it, or it's just what they like doing better than anything else. And at that point, I'm like, there are like some gray areas with hobby there that might be valid, but they might also not be. So, sorry. That was a digression.
No, that's okay. I mean, so Dave, you can weigh in on this too. I mean, you say that you always do the hobby stuff at home as well, right? I think we're all in the same boat here. I mean, well, probably you two more than I am, but
my video blog is my hobby. Right. Yet it's also what pays the bills every day.
Right.
To me, it's still a hobby. It's me just coming to the lab and bumming around. It's still there is for me now. There is no differentiation between work and hobby.
Right. But I think Todd's point is that would never be considered a hobby in the first place, right? It's just you've always been working towards doing whatever you want to do, and that's kind of working on stuff that you enjoy, working on what you want to do, and it's like that's.
I think it's got to be a hobby. If you're not working, towards an end of making money doing that particular project, then it's a hobby. Sorry. So if you're dicking around with your little arcade, vector arcade game machine, that's a hobby.
First of all, it's not little. And second of all,
it's heavy and hot.
Second of all, I would take, to complicate this notion of the hobby, which is, tell me to shut up if this is,
I'm into this, man. Let's go deep.
I'm like, take for instance a band guy, right? Or better yet, take for instance a monk, right? They don't get paid for that. They do it because they like it. I mean, they do it because it's important to them in this way where it's not a job, but I wouldn't call it a hobby either, right? To me, the thing that distinguishes a hobby is something that you do which is secondary. Like the hobby is this thing where you relax, you unwind at the end of the day with your hobby. A well-rounded person is like, I'm into golf, or I like,
I don't know about that, but okay.
I like, well, whatever, like, or fishing, or
knitting,
or knitting, yeah, sure, or and these are not people who professionally fish or knit.
But if it turns into your full-time job, why does it suddenly stop becoming a hobby just because you do it on the outside?
Because
I'm telling you, most people in the electronics industry will call, if they work on electronics outside of work, they will call themselves hobbyists. They will say it's their hobby, even though they do it for work.
Sure,
just the sheer numbers. That's just the way it is. In fact, you're probably the first I've heard of. Perhaps, I don't know. I can't recall of another one who's making the counter argument. But I can see where you're coming from.
I'm also probably the first one that you've talked to that has a degree in postmodern literature, right? So it's
no, I think you'd be surprised.
I'm all for hobbies. I think they're a healthy thing. I just don't. I think that there are some shades of gray in there that make a weirdo who does the same shit all day long, whether they're getting paid or not, different than a hobbyist.
Okay, but you haven't. So you're saying that you sold us.
So payment is secondary to what you want to work on. That's kind of what you're saying, right? Well, what he's saying is that Todd Bailey does not need to be paid, folks. So give him a call today at 212.
And I will do your things for free.
At this point, we're going to have to pull out the dictionary. I can't find my Aussie Macquarie dictionary here, so I'm going to have to rely on Google.
I know you are not going to say I know you're not going to start an argument, a rhetorical argument with the Oxford English Dictionary.
It's gotten down to that point. It's reached that level.
I don't know, man. So I've had this argument before with my wife about. So is TV a hobby? Right? I'm going to get in trouble for asking this. She claims that watching TV is a hobby.
Okay, the definition is an activity done regularly in one's leisure time for pleasure, in which case, yes, TV is a hobby.
See,
it's a hobby everyone has, but
what about sneezing? I sometimes enjoy sneezing, and I do it in my leisure time. I also do it while I'm working.
Right.
We can do. We're all people with plenty of gray cells. I think we can do better than that definition.
No, sorry, you're not sold on me. I've always have been a hobbyist, always will be.
Well, I think honestly it's a definition thing, right?
Tell you what, I will meet you here. I will say, I think the reason that you're maybe defending this so zealously is because you perhaps believe that you do this because you like it. You're like, I
know I do it because I like it.
Right. I also do it because I like it. So I think perhaps I'm offending you by calling it something other than a hobby. I think that maybe that's your way of saying I am called to do this thing whether I'm getting paid or not.
Yeah.
And I'm also saying that I'm just saying that it's a little abnormal also.
Well, I think you're right about that, and we've seen that, right? I mean, like you mentioned, like Dave has mentioned before, right? I mean, like you compare the people that go home after work, right, and continue to work on this stuff. I think that is abnormal, whatever it's called, hobby or calling or whatever it wants to be, right? It's not the norm. I think. I mean, I think.
Then what's the other word that you'd use for it? If it's not a hobby, if you just enjoy doing something that may happen to be the same or similar to what you do for your work. So
I'm just going to go take it way off the deep end because I think we're probably running out of time. So why not?
So we just cut it off at a certain point, right?
Let's finish it.
So you can be like,
click,
go home.
And the answer is,
yeah.
Where the people who are the most inspiring to me are the people who love their jobs, right? To whom the differentiation between all this stuff is gray. Like it's not just that you do it. I can't speak for you, Dave, but I would say for me, I would say that I do it because I like it, but I also hang an enormous and inordinate amount of self-worth off of it, right? Like were someone to prove to me that I was a bad engineer, it would shape the way I think about myself, right? Whereas if someone were like, Todd, you're a bad cook, I would be like, I am not. And they were like, yes, you are. I would be like, okay.
Yeah, those ain't that good.
I would say that I'm trying to avoid using the word, and this is not just for electronics, this is for people who just love the stuff that they do and do it because they can't find there's nothing they'd rather do.
Yeah.
I would call it a calling.
I knew he was going to say it, Dave.
Oh, God. Wake word of the week, folks. Calling.
No, it's fine.
Next thing you know, we'll be going on pilgrimages and we'll be...
Why do you think you think I didn't fly out to see Jim Williams' workbench?
I was going to say, yeah.
I went on a pilgrimage. I'll say it loud.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was thinking. When you were saying that personality type you were talking about, right? That's kind of the archetype that I think of, right? You know that if Jim Williams wasn't working at Linear Tech when he was writing those app notes, he would have been at home in his basement doing the exact same thing, right? I mean, that's the idea is that the dude was just happy working on electronics, and that's what you're saying you aspire to, right?
I don't know. Well, and that's the whole reason maybe I'm complicating this is because I don't know if I aspire to that. I happen to identify with that a whole lot, but I gain a lot of personal self-satisfaction out of being that way, but I don't know if at this point in my life I can argue that it's the best way to be.
Oh, you're saying it's like so you're like tormented about it? You're like, oh man.
Generally I'm not. I mean, most hours of the day I have my head in front of an oscilloscope and I'm not thinking about weighty problems, right? I'm thinking about why a circuit doesn't work.
So eventually when you walk up to Todd at the Analog Aficionados dinner in like 10 years, he's going to be like, hey, I'm Todd. I'm a friggin' engineer and I hate it. I hate that I can't stop this shit.
I'm Todd and I have a problem.
Engineers Anonymous.
Yeah, right. It's just fun to think about. Like half of the engineering is about solving problems, right? And one of the exciting things that I have always found about engineering is frequently in engineering there's a right and a wrong. Right, like more so than in art, more so than in a lot of humanistic disciplines, more so than
business,
in social sciences or what have you. There are right answers and there are wrong answers, and you can know the right answer because something works or it doesn't work. And that's so liberating. I mean, that's such a great feeling to be like, I know I can be right about anything in the world is a luxury that I think a lot of people don't have. So, so. That's one of the amazingly appealing things about this one particular discipline. I'm sure there are others out there that are like it. But with respect to all this other stuff, I just think it's interesting to consider what makes your head drawn to that sort of thing. And I wish I could figure it out.
For me, the difference between electronics as a hobby and electronics as a career almost comes down to the fact that as electronics as a career is more of a means to an end, whereas electronics as a hobby is an end unto itself, if you know what I mean. Like, I don't care if my, if I ever finish that project, just the fact, as a hobby, I don't care if I ever finish that project or I ever makes it or I ever sell it or whatever. The fact of just dicking around on it, with it, is an end unto itself. That's why it's a hobby. That's why it's enjoyable. Whereas work is always different to that. You always seem to have, your goal, you've got to do it, you're paid to meet that goal, that deadline, and etc. There's an end point. There's a means to an end. So, anyway. Meh.
So, Todd, are you saying that eventually you think that the having the sleepy hobby after work, like having the 9 to 5, might be a better way to? That's what you're pondering, is if that's a better way to live?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think I'm past that. I think it's too late.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. You
so,
he's got the knack.
I've got other hobbies outside of doing this. It's not my only hobby. Electronics, but I treat them all the same because I just do them for pleasure. I just like dicking around on them, so it's a hobby.
That sounds very well rounded. Congratulations.
Thank you.
See, Todd has the problem. That's the problem.
Right.
So, Todd, we can come back next week. We'll continue on our sessions. We'll talk more about through this. We can.
Do you have any exercises you'd like me to complete before I come back?
Repeat after me. I'm an engineer, and that's okay.
Chris, I don't know what it is about talking with you that always gets me on the couch like this about engineering. I swear.
I know, me and Todd, like, we're sitting at bars, like, hunched over, like, PBR cans, because for some reason I drink PBRs when Todd's around. And we're like, yeah, we're, like, talking about this crazy stuff. And then I get an email 2 days later. He's like, oh, we were supposed to talk about electronics, too. Okay. Yeah, right. We'll do that next time. We'll do that next time.
I suppose if I have a hobby, it's being... it's being emo about my place in the world of electronics. Right? That's my hobby. Is occasionally I dabble in introspection.
That's right, navel gazer extraordinaire.
Hold on, I gotta change into my Bloody Valentine T-shirt.
Exactly. Right this is the emo rocker coming out after all these years, right? So much angst, so little time.
Hey.
What was the other project? There was another project I was going to ask you about. Are there any other cool projects we should know about that you've worked on? I mean, there's been a lot of cool ones.
I've been geeked about work stuff lately. Again, I can't talk about it too much. There's Vec 9 right now on the bench for things I have to finish right now, or that I feel like I just made my bed fly. I have these. That's not even on the books, right? Like no one, like very few people ever actually see that. But I have this real. I live in a box, sort of, and I have a very open floor plan New York-y apartment. And it's not very big, and because of my advanced silver years, I was like, I am done climbing a ladder before I go to bed. I am not.
Right.
I am not sleeping in a loft. Yet at the same time, I love the amount of extra floor space that a loft affords you. Right. So in this particular apartment, I solved that by making these big this motor system, which makes my bed go up to the ceiling on a set of pulleys and shit.
Cool.
And it's cool. It's actually overrated enough that you can ride on it, although it's pretty tippy. So I built that. I built that a couple of weekends ago, and I think maybe you were asking about the video synthesizer that I was working on. Is that it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's the one that you took to Maker Faire or something like that.
Yeah, I got really into analog TV signals, which are great. I mean, if you're into making something that's both analog and artsy fartsy, there are a lot of great challenges to solve. In analog TV, right? Hue encoding is a great problem to solve, right? Doing it well with discrete components and stuff is a blast. So at this point, I have this prototype of this this device which takes a bunch of control voltages in, has a bunch of oscillators and filters and whatnot, and a bunch of sync generation, and generates this goofy analog video, which most of the time just looks like a unicorn puke, but. I'm pretty happy with it. It's I'm never totally happy with it, but this one's pretty good. So maybe one day that'll get out there too.
It's another kit or something like that. You're saying
that one would never be a kit. That one's there are enough. I'm kind of over through hole.
Right.
Welcome to the 2010s or the 2000s or the 90s
or the 90s.
Yeah. Right. So it's part of the kit thing is you have to scale back to through hole.
Right.
And part of it is also I want to make this thing. Where's the Party At was made to be of the people. This thing is made to be as badass as it can be, and so the design criteria are different. It uses expensive parts,
gotcha.
And
yep.
So I wouldn't necessarily want that to be a kit, right? And I also don't want. I'm not that motivated to make that many of them, but I would make a few, and I think that would be fun to have them out there. I think it's I'm happy with it. As far as competing analog video synth technologies go, I think this one is right up there with the best of them.
So I want to ask about your process real quick. Do you do any assembly house stuff at all, or do you do all self-assembly?
I definitely do assembly house stuff when it's appropriate. For this thing in the house in the Hamptons, hundreds of boards got made for that, and I damn sure wasn't going to build all of those by hand. And a lot of the time the process isn't nearly as tight, but it's most of the nature of what I do a lot of the time is either is usually not building very many of something.
Right. So setup charges kind of hit you in the gut, kind of thing.
Well, and more it's turn time, right? Most of these clients want something done really fast. So so you don't have very many board spins before your thing has to go out, and you don't have a ton of time for an assembly house to do something. And frankly, there's not that much that a skilled assembly technician can't assemble, right? Like I'm not putting together a ton of BGA boards here, and there's not, most of the things I lay out for work don't have more than 4 layers. And an 0402 is probably the smallest thing that I would ever put down. So right. It's the sort of thing that you can get done, you can, like in the time that you would spend shipping something away and getting it shipped back, it's just a question of expediency most of the time.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, because I just wonder about that with you talked about these. I guess the kit's a little different, but these devices you've worked on in the past too, and I think as some more of these one-click order, quote unquote, kind of stuff comes up, like the circuit hub guys and stuff like that. Just thinking about how that changes your relationship with this, right? If it's if it really was one click, which I don't think it will be for a while yet, but if it was just one click, how does that change? Someone like you who's interested in solving problems and idea-based design type stuff, and then just kind of offloaded that manufacturing stuff. I think that makes for an interesting change.
It does make for an interesting change. I mean, like you said, I was like, when I said something about service mount, you were like, yeah, welcome to the 90s. Printed circuit boards, being able to get a board has been something that people have been able to do for a long time, right? It's easier now that it
hey, 10 years ago, forget about getting the cheap prototype boards you got these days.
Sure.
It was just unheard of. There were no cheap prototyping services. You want a board? It's $500 plus. Thank you very much for one.
So what I'm talking about now is more like I totally 100% agree. But I'm saying you could get boards, right? Like if you were
no, you could, but yeah, it's not trivial like kids in their garage are getting boards now. 10-year-old kids building something in their garage are getting PCBs made. That was unheard of 15 years ago.
I mean, my first quote printed circuit board was definitely involved some ferric chloride.
Yeah, exactly.
And a crappy drill press.
And we huffed it for good measure. Uphill in the snow 2 ways.
So like that's like, for instance, maybe that's relevant to what you're asking. Like I have etched some boards. I have them around here. I'm proud that I did it, and I never really want to do it again.
Right.
Like I don't need to have ferric chloride in my life anymore. And so it's possible, I suppose, that assembly would get to a point like that. But, it's like when you order a board, right? Like your degree of confidence should be pretty high. Like when you're actually like ordering, glass, usually you want to have a reasonable expectation that at least most of the stuff on there will probably work,
Yeah.
And so ordering a populated board is even more like that. So I think that there are convenience factors that go along, but there's also, for me, I think it has to do with time, and it has to do maybe with a little bit of like micromanagement, right? Like getting somebody to assemble a board for you. If it's a board for hobbyist stuff, and they have like a bunch of like, they're like, we have all the 5% resistors and some 555s and LM324 and like some jacks. Like pick from whatever components you wanted, we'll put them on this board for you and send you the board. That's awesome, right? But if you're like, I'm developing this thing for this person, I don't know whether I need a 0.1% resistor, and I want to use this one because that's the one I have the data sheet for, and blah, 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 blah. Like I've found that typically speaking, like the board house that I use for assembly will be like, oh, you can just tell us what you need and we'll put it on the board for you. And you never trust them to do that. Right? Like, you're like, I don't know what random shit you have laying around from the last job you ran is. Like, no, you can't put it on my board. Like, so I think part of that is like the more variables you introduce, and when you put a ton of parts on a board, like there's a lot of variables that you introduce. The less well you can control exactly what it is that's coming out. And I do believe that probably, within our lifetime, someone will make a pretty good stab at solving that sort of thing. And if they did, awesome. Like I would buy into it if it worked. But I have not yet encountered something like that which does.
I hate to say it, but it's almost like the chip printer. It's one of those things which there's just so many subtle things involved.
Dig right in.
It's just, sorry, dude. It's just that utopia is never going to happen. Sorry.
Maybe. I don't know. It hasn't happened yet. That's all I'm saying.
It'll happen for some niche things, but no, it'll never be mainstream. I'm putting it, just hanging it out there.
Add it to the list, huh? Things to prove Dave wrong about.
What was
go for it.
What was the other thing that you were like, is a pipe dream? What did you just say?
The chip printer.
What's a chip printer?
That's the long-standing debate.
Let's not get started.
No, let's not get started there. That's the long-standing debate that Dave and I have about the possibility of one day being able to print semiconductors in some capacity in the home.
You have your tank of boron and your and your 7,000 degree heater hanging out under your bench. Well, I mean that would be awesome too if they had one. I would totally buy it.
Of course. It doesn't make it viable. You can believe all you like, but believing something is not enough to make it true.
I would love to be proved wrong on that. Like I'm not going to wish against that.
So would I.
Just keep waiting,
but
guys.
I'm a practical guy. Yeah, no, sorry.
I mean, also the other thing is I've learned, one of the other things about, it's hard for me to say one of the things about engineers is, because usually what that means is, one of the things about me is, I find that for some things I can be, like the things that I am confident in, I can be, irritatingly and obtusely cocky about, and it doesn't do well to be that way about shit you don't know that much about. And one thing I've learned the hard way that I don't know that much about is, market trend and like the sort of weird pressures that exist on the world to make different stuff. The stuff that I think is cool or useful or valid is really not always the stuff that other people think is cool or useful or valid. So, I mean, if people
like the chip printer.
So I don't know. I mean, I think that people can solve just about any problem with the right pressures, right? So I'm not. Yeah. I'm hesitant to bet against things out of hand. At least until a couple beers, at which point I get pretty cocky about
it. But we're not just talking about solving a problem here. Yes, you can print your own chips, or yes, you can do the one-line online order and click thing, but that doesn't make it mainstream viable. Being able to do something technically and being able to make it viable for the mainstream are two entirely different engineering, or it doesn't even become an engineering thing at that point.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. If you're going to make a profit at it, that's going to drive future research as well. So yeah, you're right. There's always that hump you have to get over. If no one's going to even bother to look at it, even if there's no reason to do it in the first place. So I agree with that.
Technology.
There's also business.
Yeah.
So, Todd, where can people find you online and elsewhere if they want to ask you about well, I guess that's a good question to start with. Is currently April of 2014 you accepting new work or no?
Well, I'm always accepting new work.
Okay. Always willing to talk.
Yeah, I'm always willing to talk. I mean, I love a fun problem.
Yeah. And
at this point, as you can probably tell from the evening, I'm in a pensive point in my life right now, and I'm like, I would love a new exciting problem, unlike the ones that I have had previously. So by all means, anybody who wants to get in touch, totally should, and I'd be happy to nerd out.
Someone should send Todd an email with a Zen cone in it. Send him an email that says a pine tree stands alone in a forest, and then nothing else.
they're like, yeah, and you have an oscilloscope and 5 days to solve this koan. It's more like that.
That's it.
Exactly.
Go. Here's your plane ticket.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. My website is narrative.com, like books. And,
but the I is not an I, it's a one.
Yeah, it's narrative is
a one.
NARRAT numeral 1 VE.
Those pesky URLs which are already taken. Just like you can't get that customised car number plate you want because some bastard's already taken it. So you got to be a wanker and substitute in the...
Right. 555 timer with no E in it.
Yeah, exactly.
They're like, East Timor, what's that?
Yeah.
All right, cool, man. Well, thanks for... you're on Twitter, too, right? So people can find you on Twitter.
Yeah, it's actually my real name on Twitter, so it's at Todd Bailey.
Sweet.
So get at me about your nerd problems, I guess. Or know, if you can solve all these, deep introspective, Jack Handy style thoughts, then please, get at me too about that, I guess.
One of my favorite ones came into my life recently again, and I will recite it here. If you ever drop your watch in a volcano, just let it go, because, man, it's gone. I love Jack Handy. It's so good. All right.
Well. All right. Thanks, Todd.
Boys.
It's been awesome.
It's totally been awesome. Thanks so much for all this stuff. Best of luck with the show. Best of luck with contextual electronics.
Thanks, man.
Thank you very much.
All right. Talk to you, man.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Where do you go?
192.
Where do you go? I wanna know.
192.